So there have been, terrific presentations over the last 2 days with tremendous sweeps. So there are a lot of ways for me to plug in, but Jennifer Bender raised a question yesterday about how stewardship programs can play a role. And since that's really my day job, I thought I'd talk about that and just try and provide some impactful examples on stewardship. Just structurally, we're the fourth largest public pension system in the US. We are entirely externally managed. Most of our public equity is in the US, more than 80% of public equity is passive. All of our public equity is in separately managed accounts, and we retain all of our ownership rights. We have an active corporate governance and responsible investment program. It's our responsibility to protect and create long-term value through active ownership. And we tend to focus on strengthening corporate governance and share owner rights and promoting sustainable business practices. I did want to we do a lot of engagement. Engagement is a overused and fuzzy word. It can take many forms. I think a lot of investment managers practice what I call soft engagement and quiet diplomacy, which is really designed to inform their proxy voting decisions. We tend to focus more on advocacy to change company behavior and protect our interests. And New York City has a very long and proud history of active ownership. Just in terms of why is this important for us, there's been a lot of discussion with respect to both Luba and Nathan today, universal ownership. But what does that really mean? As a universal owner, we essentially own the economy. Externalities in one part of our portfolio are internalized somewhere else. And most importantly, we have an economic interest in the overall performance of the financial markets and the broader economy. That's going to have a much bigger impact on our returns than any individual portfolio company. But also, because of our actuarial time horizon and investment strategy, we're a very long-term and essentially a permanent owner of our portfolio companies. We can't easily, walk what in the States is called the Wall Street walk, where, if we don't like a company's board of directors, their environmental practices, or their workplace practices, we can't easily sell their shares. Divestment, we've had a very limited experience with divestment, and it's difficult. We divested from gun manufacturers and thermal coal, which were a fairly small part of the portfolio. We're now looking at fossil fuel divestment, and that is a much bigger deal. And as we've retained 2 consultants to provide recommendations for how we can do that over a 5-year period, consistent with fiduciary duty. But because we can't walk away, active ownership is the only way that we can manage company risk and create long-term value. We use a diverse set of engagement approaches and tools. Proxy voting, our entire portfolio of global portfolio is voted internally. We do both company and regulatory engagement. We also submit shareholder proposals, probably about 50 to 100 a year, which makes us probably the most prolific filer among institutional investors in the world. And we submit proposals on a very broad range of ESG risks. And for us, proposals are an invitation to engage. It's not an escalation step. A negotiate and settlement is the optimal outcome. We also have a commitment to active collaboration, both formal and informal. I think it was said previously that ESG is not well defined. I'm not sure it's I'm not sure it's the most appropriate. I like to think of it as sustainability. I'll also leave it to academics to study and debate whether good ESG management creates value, but there's plenty of anecdotal evidence that failure to manage ESG risk can destroy not only value, but even human life. I think of the mine explosion at Massey Energy in 2010 that killed 29 miners and wiped out half the value of the company over the preceding 2 months. Just to tick off some of our current engagement priorities, diversity at both of the board and workforce, climate change, particularly transition risk, to make sure that our portfolio companies can successfully navigate the transition to a low carbon economy. Human capital management. Our portfolio companies love to tell us that their workers are their most valuable asset, but they provide very little information on how they manage that their workforce as an asset to be maximized rather than a cost to be minimized. And the COVID epidemic has really exposed the importance of human capital management, across industries, including health and safety as a material risk, not just in a mine or a manufacturing facility. Also, I think the racial justice protests have, shined a light on diversity and inclusion, I think caused many companies and investors to redouble their focus on diversity. Ultimately, when it comes to sustainability for us, it's all about the board. There hasn't been a lot of discussion of the G over the last couple of days, though. I thank you, Olivia, for raising the question on staggered boards yesterday. But ultimately, we look to the boards to oversee material risks, whether it's climate risk or human capital management. And we want to know that we have the right people in the room to oversee the company's strategy and risks. So it's led to a real focus on board independence, accountability, and quality, including diversity. In terms of how we construct our focus list, we think about issues. Might be climate change. We'll screen out companies with particular exposure or companies that lack diversity. And then also could be focused on company-specific concerns or company particular practices will get on a radar screen. But in terms of success, I want to talk a little bit about, I think the benchmark is either changing company behavior or market practice. We talked about universal ownership. There's a recent book recently by John Lee Cumnick and James Hawley. James Hawley is actually the professor who pioneered the concept of universal ownership. And what they talk about in the book about moving beyond more modern portfolio theory is the notion of beta activism, where investors can actually change market practice. So where we're actually changing the beta to create value. And I want to try and give some examples on both counts. First, on Massey Energy, I referenced the fact that the company lost about half its value following the explosion. That prompted a board fight where some US pension funds tried to unseat some directors and ultimately led to a change in leadership and a sale of the company that within a year, replaced much of the value that had been lost to investors. Okay, I want to talk about our campaign to implement proxy access in the US on a company-by-company basis, which we launched in 2014 by filing shareholder proposals seeking proxy access, which is the right to nominate directors at US companies. At the time, there were only 6 US companies with proxy access. Today, there's 650, including more than 76% of the S&P 500. The project's been the subject of several academic papers. First, because we announced the launch of the project on a particular day, we created an event that was studied by economic researchers at the SEC, who found that a 0.5% average increase in shareholder value at our initial focus companies. Additional findings from other studies that, while rarely used, proxy access has been used indirectly as a bargaining chip to improve diversity. And finally, another paper found that firms that we targeted specifically for environmental reasons reduce total toxic chemical releases, production-related emissions, cancer-causing pollution, environmental accidents, and related legal risks. They also said that these results do not come at the expense of lower financial performance or returns. Overall, the authors concluded that engagements are an effective tool for long-term investors to address climate change risks. I'm sorry, I think I'm out of town. Why don't I stop there?